There are legendary, almost mystical vehicles from automotive history, both on the 2- and 4-wheeled side of things. For cars, I think of companies like Duesenberg and their Model J, and the Hispano Suiza with their J12, or even the Fiat S76. Companies that are often no longer around, but when they were active, they were sometimes decades ahead of their time. But when you look at motorcycle history, one brand, and one almost mythical motorcycle from that brand, stands out above the rest as arguably the greatest motorcycle ever created, a bike so powerful and fast, it would hold the title of fastest production motorcycle for over 20 years, despite the entire industry reaching entirely new heights in terms of technology and performance. A motorcycle that would become the topic of books and dissertations and even a song.
Said I'll give you my Vincent to ride.
A motorcycle so rare and so valuable that certain models have sold at auction for upwards of $1 million. Of course I'm talking about the iconic Buell Blast. Okay, I'm kidding. No, it's the Vincent Black Shadow. Today we're looking at the background to this incredible motorcycle, the men behind its inception, and how it became a true legend of the motorcycling world. Now, the motorcycle industry is one where catching up is usually not possible, but Howard Davies' new company, HRD, was in that exact place about 20 years behind everyone else when he set out to make performance motorcycles officially in 1924. Davies was already a legend in the racing world with a recent win at the Isle of Man TT, but Davies was frustrated with manufacturers not making necessary changes to their bikes in order for him to win, so he started making his own. These early motorcycles incorporated some of his favorite features, and they were quite ahead of their time, things like twist grip throttles and a low center of gravity. Davies' new little company was ruthlessly focused on quality and performance over everything else. Just a year after starting production, Davies' HRD company would take his 500cc HD90, as it was known, to the Isle of Man, and he would win the senior TT spectacularly on his own motorcycle ahead of professional riders aboard Nortons and Scotts. If you're familiar with Jack Brabham's Formula One championship win in 1966, this is the closest thing we have to that in the motorcycle world. Yes, John Britton's story is also similar, but even he wasn't able to win the most prestigious race himself on his own motorcycle. This TT win helped Davies sell quite a few more motorcycles as they incorporated the TT trophy in the company advertising. HRD production models were now going 100 plus miles per hour, which is crazy for this time. Despite struggling to make any sort of profit, HRD continued to be known as a company that made incredible, highly sought after, and rare motorcycles. One early slogan for the company was not mass, but class. But land speed records and TT wins don't necessarily keep the lights on, and HRD couldn't help but go the way of many other startups like this at this time, and in 1927, Davies was forced to pay off his debts and cease production. Now you might be wondering, why are we going on about a failed company called HRD? Isn't this a video about the Vincent Black Shadow? Well, this is where a guy named Phil gets involved. Philip Vincent, to be specific. HRD was ultimately acquired by this young, wealthy, and highly innovative thinker named Philip Vincent. His vision and engineering prowess would lead to the legendary motorcycles that we recognize today, including the Black Shadow. Vincent's early years in the motorcycle industry were marked by ambition and personal investment. He and his collaborator Bill Clark financed their motorcycle endeavors, but once again, this company struggled to find success. In fact, Vincent sold significantly fewer motorcycles in his first 3 years than HRD had before him, and one major issue was that the bikes were frankly ugly. While Vincent's innovative frame and rear suspension designs were praised by critics, aesthetics really still plays a crucial role in sales even at this time. Performance and specs and usability are only one side of the coin, the other is how dang good your motorcycle looks. But hope would arrive in the form of another Philip, 29-year-old Australian engineer Philip Irving. Irving took Vincent's advanced but unconventional frame design and he refined it into something that was actually visually appealing. The engineering was already ahead of his time, but before Irving's revisions, the bikes simply looked too different to really gain widespread acceptance, and really, these developments from Irving marked the beginning of Vincent's rise as a company that didn't just build the fastest, best-handling motorcycles, but also some of the most beautiful. Vincent made an early appearance at the Isle of Man TT in 1934, but success eluded them. Up until this point, HRDs and Vincent's used JAP engines, engines, which were great in the early years, but they were falling behind as the other British manufacturers invested R&D into their own engines. And this failure at the TT prompted a bold decision from Philip Vincent. In his own words, the goal was to begin the design of our own 500cc engine. It was an ambitious move for a small manufacturer. While using outsourced components allows for incremental innovation, designing and building an entire in-house engine, so to speak, is a far greater challenge. Philip Irving was tasked with developing this new power plant, which became the Series A engine for Vincent. This refined single-cylinder design powered Vincent's first fully in-house motorcycles, the Meteor and the Comet. Weighing just 385 pounds, these bikes boasted top speeds close to 100 miles per hour, but more than just fast, they looked good, thanks to just a unique, refined design. Irving helped Vincent understand that innovation alone wasn't enough. A motorcycle had to capture riders' imagination, and at its core, though performance and power was fantastic, what really made these power plants stand out was also how brilliantly accessible for maintenance they were, something that would really be a hallmark for Vincent motorcycles going forward, and also the way in which the entire engine on this little single was enclosed and lubricated. It made it really set up for longevity. Vincent motorcycles were moving in a kind of buy-it-for-life direction. People who bought these Vincents that were powered by their own engines found that they could absolutely put miles down with incredible reliability, and even today, most people who own these rare, expensive Vincents, whether singles or twins, they ride them, and it's often not as much about owning some investment. Many of these people are true enthusiasts who really do still put down miles. Irving's design incorporated Vincent's advanced rear suspension setup, which used a cantilevered twin shock setup. This was far ahead of its time, and it gave these bikes far superior ride quality compared to the rather primitive suspension setups of many rival manufacturers at this time, like Norton and Velocet. Beyond engineering, Vincent pioneered customer-friendly policies that were really unusual for this time. They sold motorcycles directly from the factory, they accepted trade-ins, and they even allowed potential buyers to test ride their machines. These were practices that were almost unheard of in the 1930s. But the motorcycle we're leading to, powered by the 1000cc Vincent V-twin, which would become the stuff of legend, it actually came about by accident. Irving, studying a drawing of the single-cylinder engine that he had designed, inadvertently overlaid it with a reverse tracing of the same engine, and the result was the visual impression of a twin-cylinder engine, a big twin. Inspired, he realized that he could adapt his existing design into a large 1000cc V-twin with minimal engineering modifications, and miraculously, he knew it would fit within Vincent's existing frame. This was the next move for Vincent because luckily, Philip Vincent himself had always been a fan of the experience of riding big V-twins, and there were very few British companies making big V-twins, leading up to this point, other than Brough Superior. The goal with this new project was simple: produce a motorcycle capable of easily powering you past 100 miles per hour. This led to the creation of the Rapide, a 430-pound, 45-horsepower beast. However, Irving left Vincent to work for Velocet before the Rapide could reach the public, and then sales were initially poor for one simple reason: nobody believed the performance claims. A 100-mile-per-hour motorcycle at this time, it was somewhat mythical. In many ways it was. Few bought this motorcycle, and unfortunately for everyone, World War II arrived. The war brought about the demise of many small British motorcycle manufacturers. Companies like Triumph and Norton survived, of course, by supplying military motorcycles and other wartime machinery, and Vincent luckily secured military contracts not for motorcycles, but rather to produce landmines and rocket fuses. These contracts somehow kept Vincent afloat. Still, Philip's mind remained on motorcycles, and like so many companies at this time, during the war, he spent time refining his ideas that would revolutionize the motorcycle industry after the war, including figuring out how to use the engine as a stressed member of the frame. While this concept had been experimented with before, applying it to a big 1000cc V-twin was pretty groundbreaking. As the war drew close, Philip Irving returned to Vincent to help develop their first post-war motorcycle, the Series B Rapide, their goal was rather ambitious: to build the perfect motorcycle, one that could sustain 100 plus miles per hour for long periods with minimal discomfort and total reliability. It also had to be nimble, lightweight, and offer superior handling. In the 1940s, a time when most production motorcycles struggled to hit 80 miles per hour without shaking themselves apart or spewing hot oil onto the rider's leg, this was no small feat. Now, with their refinements, the bike was phenomenal. While its specifications didn't vastly surpass the original Rapide, it would lay the foundation for what was to come and earn its title as the fastest production motorcycle of its time. The Series B Rapide could reportedly hit 56 miles per hour in first gear, compared to many Triumphs and Nortons at this time, which barely managed 15 miles per hour in the same gear. Journalists at the time noted the Series B Rapide was in a class of its own. But Philip Vincent wasn't finished. As the saying goes, the third time's the charm, and after producing the Series A and B versions of their big twin, it was time for the next evolution, the Series C. And this was the motorcycle that would cement Vincent's place in history. The reason we still talk about this brand today is because of this motorcycle. Sure, the goal had been to make the perfect motorcycle, and for its time, the Rapide was essentially that. Now it was time to build a legend. This would be the birth of the Black Shadow. So how do you make the perfect motorcycle better? Well, it's simple. You look into the future and you figure out what the perfect motorcycle will be for those riding 5, 10, 20, and even 30 years from now, and you make that motorcycle so that people who buy it will have the fastest motorcycle in the world, even decades on. It turns out what Philip Vincent determined to be the expectations of riders going forward would also be his own expectations. What he wanted was a motorcycle that wasn't just fast. He wanted a motorcycle to have on tap a sort of unlimited power. He wanted it to be essentially impossible for any normal rider to reach the bike's maximum speed on public roads, and he wanted power on tap everywhere. Thankfully, the Big V Twin was the perfect platform for such a goal, and we know this still to be true today. And throughout motorcycle history, manufacturers have learned and relearned the true potential of the V-twin setup. To start, the team took a broken down Rapide and began tinkering with and tuning it. Interestingly enough, Rapides were leaving the factory in a rather mild state of tune despite being the fastest motorcycles in the world. So could this engine be kind of hopped up to make significantly more power like that of their race bikes and still maintain reliability? It turns out they could, and the result was 55 horsepower instead of 45 and a top speed of 125 miles per hour or more. The up in power was thanks to a higher compression ratio, larger carbs, and polished components for better airflow and fuel flow. Vincent had learned their lessons about styling. This bike had to stand out, but interestingly enough, sometimes the best way to stand out is to be understated. Instead of adding more chrome and more flashy paint, they decided to black out the new bike to match its new name. The Black Shadow would have a black engine, gearbox, primary chain case, and magneto cowl with subtle chrome accents here and there, and this gave the bike just the most unique, sort of hardcore look. Unlike anything else in the motorcycling world at this time, it completely stood out. The stripped back look of the bike, due to its pursuit of weight savings, screamed race bike, and the massive 150 mile per hour speedo did as well. Even journalists and testers at this time couldn't believe the power and speed of this new motorcycle. They described it sometimes as constant and colossal. What's perhaps even more fascinating is the way in which the motorcycle was entirely developed as a whole for the true motorcycling touring gentleman. This was unequivocally not just a race bike for the road. It wasn't like a Desmos Adichie RR of the 50s. Vincent's motorcycles up to this point had become known for being reliable, serviceable, comfortable, and usable. For Philip Vincent, this meant that the bike still needed to start easily, needed to have solid fuel mileage, and be simple to work on. The new improved Gerdrolic front suspension and improved rear hydraulic suspension gave the bike comfortable but, performance handling. The handling of this bike was really a cut above other performance bikes at the time, despite primarily being viewed by many as just a top speed machine. Those who've ridden these bikes extensively will tell you that it's like riding nothing else from this time. It's like a modern bike, but not just in the power, also in the ride quality. Vincent incorporated a brilliant system for removing and working on the engine, thanks to it being a stressed member. A mechanic only needed to unbolt the front and rear mounting points, allowing the entire unit to be dropped without disassembling the frame. So this stressed member design not only reduced weight, it improved rigidity, but it also made engine servicing significantly easier compared to, conventional motorcycles of the time and even going forward. When the Black Shadow was released to the public in 1948, it was unlike anything the world had ever seen, at a time when most production motorcycles still struggled to crack 90 miles per hour. The Black Shadow was truthfully advertised as capable of going beyond 125 miles per hour, a figure that defied expectations and set it apart as the fastest production motorcycle on Earth by far. When the first Black Shadows reached customers, the response was a mixture of awe, disbelief, and even intimidation. Riders accustomed to the more pedestrian speeds of even Nortons and BSAs and Triumphs suddenly found themselves on a machine that could outrun almost anything on 2 or 4 wheels. Though Vincent Motorcycles had never been fully committed to Grand Prix racing, preferring to kind of build the ultimate road-going machines, kind of like the Ninja H2 of its time, the Black Shadow found itself at home in speed trials and endurance racing. The bike's most famous moment came in 1950 when Raleigh Free shattered the world motorcycle land speed record on the Bonneville Salt Flats. Dressed in nothing but a bathing suit and sneakers, Free famously laid flat across the saddle, reducing wind resistance to an absolute minimum, and his 150.313 miles per hour run on a modified Vincent Black Lightning, that is the Black Shadow's even rarer and more powerful sibling, set a new standard for speed and became one of the most iconic moments, really, in motorcycling history. This image of Free stretched out on the salt flats, speeding towards immortality, really cemented Vincent's reputation as the builder of the fastest motorcycles in the world. Beyond Bonneville, the Black Shadow made its mark in endurance racing, setting many 24-hour speed records. Despite being the best motorcycle in the world by far, the Black Shadow's production life was really short-lived. Vincent ceased motorcycle production in 1955. Sadly, financial struggles and an increasingly competitive market made it difficult at this time for a small, sort of luxury brand to really compete. By then, fewer than 1,700 Black Shadows had been built, and this would make them an exceedingly rare breed. Over the decades, the Black Shadow would kind of become the stuff of myth and folklore. It was a machine spoken about in hushed, reverent tones. Owning one of these motorcycles was akin to possessing a piece of motorcycling's holy grail. Hunter S. Thompson famously immortalized the Vincent Black Shadow in his writing, describing it as the perfect thing to ride on a very long trip. With the throttle screwed on, there is only the barest margin and no room at all for mistakes. His words captured the visceral, untamed essence of this motorcycle. It was not a machine for the faint of heart. Despite its usability, it was really built for those willing to push the limits of both man and machine. Now, I want to end this by reading a final portion of David Wright's amazing book on Vincent. He says, Howard Davies and Philip Vincent were two men who were not satisfied with the motorcycles produced by others. With the self-confidence and resolve to do something about the situation, Davies set out to manufacture quality motorcycles of the type that he wanted to ride and race. Vincent set out to change the motorcycling world by producing his idea of what a motorcycle should be. Their motorcycles were designed to appeal to discerning riders who were prepared to pay extra for a quality product. Both discovered that to the majority of buyers in the world of motorcycling, utility and low price were all important. That was not the Vincent way and HRD way, but it was the commercial way. I feel like this is such a great summary of how this kind of pursuit of the ultimate machine doesn't always lead to commercial sales. Sadly, making the greatest motorcycle in the world isn't necessarily enough, and Honda showed this. They needed the Super Cub before they could justify making the CB750. That's just the way it is. Still, we can't overstate just how influential this company and this motorcycle really have been, and I hope you guys enjoyed this look at a different time in motorcycling history and a story that really isn't talked about enough. We'll see you guys in the next video. Ride safe.